This episode is brought to you by The Guarantors. Chasing down residents who don't pay their rent is taxing enough. Did you know you could offset the risk of renter default? Meet The Guarantors. They'll requalify your applicants and insure their rent. If the resident doesn't pay, you still get paid. Visit theguarantors.com/multifamily today.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Optimized, a marketing performance podcast. I'm Janet Rosseth, your host, a 25-year veteran of multifamily marketing and founder and CMO of Cadence Marketing Solutions. And today we have special guest Stacey Feeney from Zipcode Creative talking to us about how to optimize and reach 1% better somewhere in our personal lives, professional lives, whether it's bringing your personal best to your work, building efficient work processes, uncovering new trends, or making sense of meaningful data. We're going to try and help you optimize today. Hi, Stacey.
Hey there. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's going to be a fun conversation today. You and I have been covering the conference circuit together and listening and learning from all of our marketing friends out there on the hazards and pitfalls and pain points of branding. So I thought it was perfect timing to bring you on to the show today and talk specifically about branding from an optimized perspective.
That would be great.
All right. So why don't you start out by just giving us a little bit of a background on you and Zipcode Creative?
Yeah, so I used to be on the property management side. I worked on a marketing team handling creative for a large portfolio of communities, anywhere from new devs to acquisitions and all the things. I got laid off from that job and I saw a need for a specialized creative agency in our industry, one that really understands the need, can handle your branding projects from a variety of solutions. And so we offer anywhere from packages to one-off requests because we know that sometimes you just need one thing for creative support. So we're here to help you with all of it.
Thank you. That was good. I love how you've got background from this side of the table, from within a marketing department, actually boots on the ground in multifamily. So I think you understand the pain points just a little bit differently.
That's right.
And to give a little context here, I got to accompany you to the AIM conference in Huntington Beach a couple of weeks ago and hung out at the Zipcode Lounge with the yearbook, which was so fun to see everybody get involved in that. And we got to hear a lot of conversations. And then you hosted a roundtable breakfast, and we got to really tap into what marketers are experiencing out there. And we didn't just have marketers. We had a couple of vendor supplier partners out there and operators.
Yeah.
And then we went on to the very first Multifamily Marketing East conference, which you branded the whole thing from logo up, and it was gorgeous.
Oh, thank you so much.
So well done. I was so impressed. And we got to be part of a couple of breakout conversations there too. So I feel like this conversation is perfectly timed to just chat through some of the pain points that we're hearing out there. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're hearing from these conversations?
Yeah. So we heard so many great, heard from so many great people from all types of property management companies over the last few weeks, from the big, bazootos of the world to some smaller teams that maybe only have one marketer handling everything. And, a lot of what we heard, let's just maybe tackle one thing at a time. But one thing in particular being, let's see, where do we want to start, Janet? Gosh, I
know there were so many. We could start at the very beginning of branding on just the general concept of convincing sometimes owners and developers that brand is much more than a logo.
That's right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that is definitely one that we see a lot when companies come our way to do a brand proposal. Oftentimes ownership groups are thinking, hey, I just need a logo, right? Or maybe a color palette too. But, branding is so much more than a logo. And I know that many of the marketers do understand that and they understand the value, but it's often it's hard to see the higher ups, the VPs, ownership really taking foot and understanding that value as well. And so it's something that we've been wrestling with, how can we better equip our marketing friends with tools to help them be able to convince their ownership to, really invest in a brand. And why is that important?
Right. The ROI on branding has been a really challenging conversation,
Mhm.
especially, given the last 5 years in our industry, leasing has not been challenging until the last 18 months or so. And the next 18 months or so, we expect the same thing. It's a competitive playing field out there. And for some owners that wrote their pro formas 2-3 years ago on a new development, it was easy to, scale back a marketing budget or not consider. I don't even think a branding budget belongs in the marketing budget. Marketing kind of comes
Yeah,
after. It's almost like in the product development budget in your
I would agree
construction
with that.
pro forma, that
Yeah.
branding and identifying who your key audience is and how you're going to target them and what the brand is going to stand for and the property is bringing to life and the vibe, I think is
Mm.
so important.
Yeah, it's positioning from the start. It can inform so many other things than just what people might imagine is branding. It is, as I already mentioned, much more than a logo. But what is it, right? Let's maybe talk about that for a second. Because, when we do a brand strategy, before we ever start to design a logo or any of that stuff, we're looking at so many things. We're looking at the resident demographics. We're looking at the location in the market. And I know a lot of that they may be doing as well, especially if it's new dev. They may have internal teams that have already kind of looked at general location and demographics, hence why they chose to break ground on a certain site. But it goes deeper than that when it comes to branding. We start to look at further data like um, psychographics beyond just demographics. So kind of looking at trends to see what are these residents actually doing? How are they spending their day, their life? Why are they living in this location? What's drawn them to this particular area? There's many reasons why that may be. But also further than that, like I mentioned, if how they're spending their day, is there a coffee shop nearby that they want to frequent and walk to? Is there, do they have a dog and there's parks nearby they can run with their dog, right? There could be so many reasons. It's beyond just the standard age range and, gender and income and all of that stuff we're all used to seeing.
Right. I think you said it earlier too, that it really informs so many other things along the way too. And it makes it easier for the marketing role to then develop the ad strategy and everything down to sales enablement and the sales office and the leasing, if there's a trailer or a model. When you've got a brand and a vibe and a couple of key statements to align with, everything else comes into play more
Mhm.
easily. A color
There-
palette,
Yeah.
you stick to the same things and you develop that brand. And when you train new leasing agents or property managers, you train them to speak the brand rather than simply to lease the property, where it could get very diluted and not necessarily connect a prospect to that experience.
Yeah, that's right. Speak the brand. That's a key thing that you just said because I find that oftentimes messaging and voice and tone development is often left out of the equation when it comes to brand packages. And I find it's usually due to budget. But again, is it maybe a further deeper question of do they just not understand what that really is and the value that it brings? Because, as a logo, of course, you need that. It's the visual face and representation of the name of your company. But once someone sees the logo somewhere, they're seeing more they're seeing a website, they're clicking in, there has to be words on the page. What are those words going to say? And then furthermore, if a brand is truly created and woven into the culture of the company down to the on-site leasing teams, then that message, voice, and tone should be coming out of the mouths of the people who are on site helping prospects with their tours and deciding if they're going to live there.
Absolutely. Even beyond just new developments, we've had a lot of conversations about corporate rebrands. I know you and I have
Mhm.
shared conversations in our Cadence Run Club with a lot of our marketing members and even our vendor and supplier members when it comes down to a corporate rebrand and maybe they just feel like they need to freshen their font a little or freshen the logo a little. When I'm engaged with clients and we come to that conversation, my next question is always, well, what does your brand stand for? Where's your mission, vision, values? What are
Yeah.
some of your key brand statements? And I can't tell you how often that does not exist yet. In
Right.
a company that's been around maybe 30, 40 years, it happens all the time.
And it's never
It's
too late to create that,
correct.
and maybe there was a time in the past, especially if they'd been around a long time, maybe that type of stuff wasn't needed. But in today's world, with the type of generation that is the new resident generation upcoming, they see right through everything. They want true authenticity. And I know that has become a buzzword. We can't just throw around authenticity, but are we really practicing it? And they can see through everything. So the more we can be upfront and define who we are, and sometimes we don't know who we are. That's what a branding development process can pull out, is defining who do we want to be. And then if we can put methodologies in place, then we can train our teams to become what we want to be. And ultimately, that leads to brand recognition and something that the resident can cling on to, connect with, resonate with, and find a place to live in a culture that they want to be a part of.
Right. And you want your brand to really speak to its audience, being prospects or residents, so that
Mm-hmm.
you continue to attract that loyalty. But I think even more so, you want it to speak to the employees. And we had a
Yeah.
conversation this morning, you and I, with some of our members as well. And we asked if I were to go and ask 10 members of your company what the brand stands for, would they all 10 answer the same way? And I think unanimously, nobody could step in and say yes. They would all speak the same way. They all know exactly what our mission is. They know exactly what our vibe is. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're recruiting or you are continuing to resonate with that long-term employee, I think that's so important that you've got a really key alignment with what your brand stands for.
Mm-hmm.
It enables your training. It enables your delivery of customer service. It enables all the onboarding of the automation responses and AI that everyone's deploying. That brand language should speak in there as well, and your reputation management. It should all carry across the entire experience for employees and for prospects and residents.
Yeah.
So I think we kind of established that there are a lot of pain points out there. One of the other ones that we heard quite a bit related back to, so you spend all this time developing a brand on a brand new property, you bring it to market, it gets through lease up into stabilization, you go back 2 years later and the brand has really been diluted.
That's right.
So keeping that consistency and those expectations with team members and employees to continue to deliver the brand and expand on the resident experience is a challenge.
Yeah. And so what I think we've kind of come to the conclusion of is it's a stepped process, right? So number one, have the brand created right and professionally from the start. Number two, put it together in such a way, maybe a playbook or some type of training modules where you can take it to the extension of your team and make sure everyone understands the brand, understands how to read a brand guide, even, especially if there's someone further down the line that may be creating a social graphic or a flyer announcement or something on site. We don't want them just putting it together in Microsoft Word. And that's where it starts to get diluted. But how can we teach them, one, at the beginning, how to understand brand guidelines and the components that make it up and how to use them in such a way. And maybe they'll be using tools like Canva or something that's user friendly for a non-design professional type of person. And that's totally okay. Those tools are at our disposal for that very purpose. But it has to be created right from the start and preloaded. Maybe templates are created. And that way it takes the pressure off of the corporate marketing team if they can set it up right from the start and train everyone else to use it.
Right. I'm a big fan of self-serve framework so that there isn't buckling in the marketing department. Everything funnels through the marketing department. And when it requires the graphic designer within the marketing team to make every little change on every little flyer, it just can really prevent you from looking forward at what needs to come next because you're so busy trying to react to what's coming at you right now.
Yeah.
So I feel like you and I have had so much opportunity to hear the pain points and talk about the pain points. And maybe what we both established is really that for a brand really to be done well and done right, you need to get out of the weeds. We've talked to a lot of teams that have a graphic designer on staff or have somebody that's capable of running graphic design. But essentially, if you're going to approach a rebrand or a new brand or reinforcing brand standards, it feels like it's just a big enough project and a big enough focus to take it outside of that team that's stretched across bandwidth and take it to an expert.
Yeah. And while I don't want to turn it into a sales pitch here, I will say, that's what we're here for. We're here to support you, and we come at it from that higher level perspective at Zipcode Creative. And we have so much research and discovery that backs the brand developments that we create. We can take that load off of their plates so that then they can take our assets from the brand creation and be more of the production arm to create those secondary pieces they're going to need. Maybe it's a rack card or a brochure or whatever they might be creating. Now, some teams we've worked with don't have a designer at all, and then they can work with us on all those pieces if they need the help. But that's exactly why I created this company, was to help my marketer friends who are already wearing way too many hats as it is. So where can we help take the pressure off?
Right. I'm curious, when you're out around town, you see a property, you see signage on the property, you see websites, you see everybody's opportunities, I'll call them.
Okay.
From an optimized standpoint, where do you see the lowest hanging fruit on just really enabling your brand to reach a little bit further? Where would you encourage people to look first and dig just a little deeper if they don't have an enormous budget to rebrand completely? What could they take as the next step?
I think from a visual standpoint, I would say developing something more to, how do I phrase this? Something more to actually create a visual identity. I mean, that's literally what we call it, beyond just logo and colors, because I'm finding that so many properties out there are still just doing the very, very basics. And then they all just start to look the same and very templatized. And so, if we're trying to stand out against the competition, which there's so much of it today, and how are we going to differentiate when we all have this near same amenity packages? It's where we start to bring in secondary visual identity creation. That could be things such as, patterns, shapes. I'm making this up, but you might have seen one that looks like a splash of paint, or it could be in imagery, it could be in stock photography and the use of that and the very curated approach that it takes. It could be custom illustrations, just something entirely, maybe your property is really, connecting into the story of something historical on the former land site. And so how are we going to tell that story visually? Or maybe, you're in some urban area and your target resident is young and they just want something really fun and exciting. So how do we make the visuals speak to that? And that all comes into play beyond logo and color. And then taking that into the physical space. Maybe there's wall murals, art in the room. So brand goes far beyond just that initial development of a logo in those ways too.
Right. That's where you really start to activate the space too. And it really comes down to creating that vibe too. I always think when you walk into a new development, if there's a, hip, upbeat vibe to the design elements on the outside of the building, I kind of expect to walk into a certain type of playlist. That's
I love that.
just scent, and really hit all five senses. And I want to go back for a second to what you were talking about with just creating maybe a texture or a pattern. What you did with the Multifamily Marketing East logo, I thought was so cool that it looked like it was just a texture behind that image, but it was actually the map of the harbor.
Yeah. Yeah, we really leaned into location with that brand because, the conference itself named Multifamily Marketing East. We really wanted to play on East because there's not currently a conference in the eastern part of our country dedicated to marketers and multifamily. So we really connected with the fact that it was going to be in Baltimore, and we pulled a map of the harbor, and we used elements like that to just bring fun to the brand.
It was really well done. I loved that.
Thank you.
Um, Tell me a little bit about just the discovery phase. I think, you and I talked about the need to get out of the weeds. Our marketing departments are spread so thin already. We're doing way too much with way too few people most of the time. And even if there is a graphic designer on staff, this type of a project needs a little more brain space and
Mhm,
creative space to evolve. How
mhm.
long should that process take? What does it look like? How do you take clients through that discovery process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we when we do a branding package, we usually estimate 6 to 8 weeks for that process. And that's actually significantly fast compared to what many creative agencies are doing. And that's really because of my background in the industry. And I know how fast we need things. And especially when it's an acquisition and a rebrand, we'll work even faster because we know that closing is in 30 days and you need all the things. So now, don't quote me that I'm going to do a whole brand development in 30 days now, but just know that we are attuned to your needs in that sense. But we start our branding process with a deep dive questionnaire that they'll fill out on their own and maybe coordinate within their team to answer those questions. We'll ask things like, well, number one, a lot of information about the property itself, what's its offerings, what's its unique approach. If there was a problem, what's the solution your property is solving, right? Questions like that. We want to know base information about the location and why you chose to build there or acquire that particular property. We also ask fun questions like, if your brand was a celebrity, who would it be? And kind of things like that that start to pull out personality. And then from there, we get on a creative call where we can really talk through in live time that vision with our clients because we want it to be a collaborative process. We know that there are stakeholders that have a certain vision, or we've had situations where they wanted to have one of their brands be a nod to the founder of the company in some way because of a sentimental reason, and that's cool too. I do love when a brand can have a story or a meaning behind it, even if it's something that's not obvious to the average person, but if it means something to someone, it makes it special and you can tell that story. And then from there, we start developing concepts, and then we bring our client into the concepts before we fully hash them out so we can see like, hey, we could go a few directions here according to the ideal resident we've identified for that community. We think that these different vibes, as you've said earlier, would appeal to them, and which one resonates best with you guys and your company vision and culture, and then we'll take it from there.
We will get right back to the episode after a word from our sponsor. Attention, multifamily pros. If you haven't heard of the Guarantors, take note. They provide insurance products that ensure you will ultimately and simply collect what's owed if a resident stops paying. Widen your applicant pool, turn conditionally approved and denied applicants into residents, and protect against the financial threat of renter fraud, all at no cost to the operator. With awesome customer service and a complete risk mitigation suite, it's a no-brainer. Visit theguarantors.com/multifamily and speak to their team today.
I love that. I think it is a little slower process than people want it to be sometimes, but I think it's a
Mhm.
really important process because creativity takes a little bit of brain space,
Yeah.
and taking it off the people who are inundated with tasks all day long can be helpful. to get a fresh perspective on it. And sometimes a neutral party and fresh perspective sees things differently than those who are sitting right within the organization.
Yeah, I will say this for the sake of any designers that might be listening. And you know what I mean, that creativity cannot be manufactured. And
Right.
sometimes when you're working and you have so many things on your to-do list, and now suddenly you need to create a brand and have it due back in 2 weeks, like you almost feel the pressure and the force to create it when you're not feeling it. And,
Mhm.
sometimes you just need to like go lay flat on your stomach and have your matcha and, have the birds chirping. And, you have to like find your creative space to get creative and do your best work. And so, I know a lot of times you guys on the marketing teams don't have time to do it that way. And so,
So correct.
if we can just say this to all the owners out there, let's start the branding process sooner so we have more
Yes.
time to do our best work.
Oh, I so agree. I had the best team at two former companies. I've had the best team with some really creative graphic designers on the team. And the last company I worked for, the graphic designer was so talented. She was so good, but she hated logos. She just despised them. And every time we had a new property coming, she was like, please don't make me do the logo, because she'd try, you're creating something from scratch, something from nothing. It doesn't really exist. And then there's, 6 different stakeholders that are going to look at it. And one's going to say, can we have sharper corners? And the other's going to say, I like it a little more round. And just not
That's
feeding
right.
her enough specific information about the property that everybody can align on. So I think sometimes it does really help to just have an expert pull in the conversation and hear all sides and then bring it all together, because we get a little emotional about it sometimes.
That's a good point because,
A little
as
attached.
yeah. Well, and as a graphic designer, like you're not amazing at everything. There's so many different things that designers do. Like you could be more of an illustrator or more of a layout artist, or maybe you just maybe you're better at designing a website than you are a logo. Like you have something that you're kind of better at. And that's why in our team, rather than having, full-time staff that we forced to handle everything, I actually take on more team members and play to their strengths. So I have someone who is amazing at logos and loves doing them. And I have someone who's like your friend, hated doing logos, but loves doing other things. So we really can collaborate and divvy up the work and play to everyone's strengths. That's another way to do our best work.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk just a little bit too about we've heard so much about the ROI of branding. Everybody wants a number. Everybody wants the math on, well, what is it going to get me if I spend, $20,000-$30,000 on a new brand? What is it really going to get me? A logo should be just fine, or a fresh color palette should be just fine. And we've talked about it's hard to put math behind that.
Yeah.
And it's maybe easier to look at the opportunity cost and the consequences of not having a solid logo and a solid brand where you can align your employees to the pitch of the product, whether it's your overarching company brand or it's an individual property, and how easy when you have a really good, approachable brand, whether it's fun or it's energetic or it's trendy,
Right.
the ability you have to very quickly create t-shirts for your whole group on move-in day, or, resident signs in the elevator that look fun and attractive and, create some vibe. It just makes everything so much easier than recreating the wheel or taking the chance that you've got property teams that are just making signs in Word and putting them in the elevators, or making
Yeah.
their own brand because they like these colors today.
True.
When you
Well,
look
and you
at
have,
side-by-side comparison in the market and how competitive it is right now, when you look
yeah.
at side-by-side a property that's really succinct in their brand versus a property that just, has a sign and maybe a basic logo on their entry door as you come in, what's the difference in the experience that the prospect has?
Yeah. I hate to boil it down to this, but I think at the bare minimum, we need to say enough of your comps are doing it. So you should be too, if you want to keep up with the Joneses and be seen as legitimate. And we have to remember that these residents are finding you online first. They're not, I mean, chances are they're not driving by and just walking in like maybe at one time in years past. They're finding you on the digital landscape through an ILS or a Google search, and they're going to look at a few of them before ever scheduling a tour. And they're likely going, especially like I said earlier, when you all have a similar amenity package and offering, which
Yep.
one's going to appeal to them faster and actually make them take action is one that has a more well built out brand that is stated well, and they understand what you are selling, and maybe the visuals they can connect to and relate to in a way in their life and in their, because again, when we create a brand and we are looking at who is the target resident for that property, we create the brand to speak to that person specifically. And I know what you're thinking, well, what about fair housing? Well, don't worry, we're thinking about that too. And we're going to make sure the images show all types of age, race, and gender. But because we're gearing the brand toward that demographic resident you're trying to attract, that's what it's going to do. When they see your property online, it will attract them, and then they're going to be intrigued, and then they're going to click in further and further and hopefully come visit.
Right. I mean, it can be such a differentiator too. When you think about a smaller urban building with micro units, it's not going to have the same vibe and the same lifestyle feeling as, an over 55 empty nester new development that's attracting people who are now just getting their life back after spending their weekends doing yard work. It's just it's a different vibe, and differentiating it, I think brand creates feeling.
Yeah.
And it speaks to emotion, and emotion currently is not a fair housing principle. So I think you do have to attract people on their emotional feelings. And we sell in this industry probably the most emotionally driven product that people are going to purchase or lease from us, and that's home.
That's
how
right.
we feel about home, how we feel when we come home and our pets are there, our family's there, our own personality comes into the environment, and capturing that in brand is really important. I do think too, if you speak to the prospect journey a little bit, it's not linear anymore. It's not, everybody doesn't follow the same route. And we go to Google, we land on an ILS, we choose 5 properties, we tour them all, and we pick the floor plan based on the one that had the biggest closet. It does not happen. No matter how hard we think it does, it doesn't. People bounce all over. I think we're at like 15 to 20 different experiences with your brand in different places. So if they're seeing it on Google, there's a very simple version that you get to share on Google. You don't get a whole lot of creativity on your Google business listing, but you can create a little bit of a differentiator with some texture in your images.
Yeah.
And the way that you word the brand description. And when people leave an ILS and go to your property website, I always say that's your storefront. That's where you really can deliver a differentiated experience and capture something more than just the flat basic information that they're comparing. Yeah. And then they bounce to social media, and I call it the digital drive-by. And they check in to see what it's like to actually live there. And if you can carry that brand vibe all the way through all of those experiences and come back to reviews and reputation to see if the people living there actually are enjoying it to that level, it speaks to the whole experience.
And then furthermore, then when they do walk in the door, does the appeal of the interior design and the physical experience, does it mimic all of what you've seen so far online? Because
that's the human experience.
And the human experience, how they're treated, how they're spoken to by staff, all of that makes the brand. And as we also know, brand recognition and touch point, a consumer needs 10 to 12 touch points before they're ready to buy. And so that is for a resident too. So when they see your brand in all these places and they start to see your truth, that your brand is truly what it says it is, when every place they show up, they're being shown the same cohesive story, then they can trust it and feel comfortable signing a lease there. Yeah.
Absolutely. I know some of the biggest purchases I've made online, and I think about little purchases even. Start on Amazon, think I'm just going to grab a pair of comfy shoes for the next conference we're going to. And, there are a lot of shoes that look just fine online, but I end up going with the ones that there's a proven experience. There's a proof, they show well. There's a vibe, there's a feeling. I'm being shown somebody who looks like they're spending a lot of time during the day on their feet. And that's what draws me all the way through to the final purchase. And I think we sometimes, there are some in our industry who are fantastic at branding and really prioritize it. And then there are others who really see it as fluff and, an extra expense that just is unnecessary. And I do think that at the end of the day, it really can impact the ROI on, the ability to lease against competition, attract really good employees, keep residents longer, and increase the asset success all around.
Yeah. And one other thing that brand can do, when we think about all the various property types out there, and even in multifamily, as we are fully in that world at our agency, there are so many things that make up multifamily. It's not always the big full package, amenity package, luxury building. There can be older assets that don't have everything. There could be even BTR, where they may not even have a clubhouse, but that's still multifamily. There's different property types out there, and there's different ways that brand can position those and strategically pull out what those differentiators are and speak in the visuals, but mainly so in the messaging as to why should you live here instead of one of the full suite places that seems more attractive at first thought, right? So we have to get creative and we have to think strategic. And that's what happens in a branding process. So you don't have to necessarily be going to a full scope branding package, because maybe you're at a property type that doesn't really make sense for. But what does make sense is the basics that we would consider do go beyond logo and color. And I would always recommend messaging no matter what, because that's where we can get crafty with how we're talking about the property to say, this is why you should live here. These are the benefits to you for living here in particular.
Right. If there is ever a product type that's having a day right now, it's like B and C product. I don't know if you read our buddy Grady Newman from Resi posted a couple of days ago on LinkedIn about the ability for B and C product to really change how they pitch amenities, because while they may be competing against somebody new right around the corner that has a golf simulator and a, theater and, podcast recording studio, what residents really are telling us they want in all the reviews, Wide Whale is doing a big voice of the resident series, and all the Satisfax just came out with one. What residents really want at the end of the day is strong Wi-Fi, good cell service, good water pressure, an actual place to park their car, and, perhaps better sound between walls. Like, there are buildings that don't need to work so hard to compete that can speak to those things, but no one's really talking about them.
That's so true.
Prospecting. So you can have a lot of fun with branding or messaging or just your descriptive words that you use on capturing those things that seem to be the most important.
Yeah, because even some of those older property types, they may have been built larger than they are today. And so maybe that's the differentiator. Like, this is your home, this is your space, and you have more space to spread out, and I know that's a little cliche to say, like, obviously we would say it more.
Oh, you would have so much fun with it, I'm sure of it.
Yeah. But like, as a point to say, like, you could even be funny with it. Like, you're probably realistically, you're never going to use that golf simulator next door, but wouldn't you like to have more room to have all the furniture you want and spread out, and your dog can run across the room and wear himself out, like
good copywriting can really make a difference.
Yeah.
Oh, this has been such a good conversation. I feel like we could talk about this all day long, and
I
the number
know.
of people we've come across in the industry that are just working their hardest to do the best they can with what they have available. This is a conversation that needs to surface a little bit more on just
Yeah.
prioritizing brand and understanding that the effort you put into it in the beginning is going to just set the playing field for better competition for your properties and for your company long run. So thank you for joining me. I always have one last question for my guests, and that, really bringing back the 1% and optimizing. And I think we talked about this as it relates to brand, but what do you do? What do you do personally or professionally to just keep gaining 1% better when it feels monotonous in your day to day? What do you do? I
Can
know
I
you're going to say
answer?
it's your matcha tea, but
Well, this is my daily addiction. Um, so I have three answers to this.
okay, yes, I
Um,
like 3.
okay. So for branding, 1% better for us is looking to outside industries and being inspired by what's going on. So hospitality is an obvious one because it's so similar to multifamily, but in many ways the difference is there. We can learn a lot. And even not just multifamily, I mean anything. It could be Nike shoes. I mean, what we can look to so many other brands and let that inform the work that we're doing. So that's what we do on the branding
It's a good
front.
one.
I would say for me as a business owner, I like to, listen to podcasts and things like that. If I'm going to read a book, it's always one that's going to help me grow in some way as a business owner. But I also ask a lot of questions. Like I know that I don't know everything. And so I try to hang out with smart people and ask all of you lots of questions. And then
Also a great
personally,
one. Hold on before you move
okay.
on. What's the latest book you read that you want to recommend?
Oh gosh. So I have to admit it, I haven't read one in a little while because it's been a busy season.
Busy.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. One that impacted me quite a bit recently was called Founder Brand.
I've
And
heard
so
about that one.
yeah, and so since I am, we are a bootstrapped boutique creative agency, and I've been doing the Founder Brand thing. I'm sure you've seen me on LinkedIn. So that was a good influence for me.
Good. Okay. And what's number 3?
Okay, number 3 is personally, I get 1% better by staying grateful and humble and always giving glory to the number one Lord up above who runs my life. So I have to give him all the credit. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for Jesus.
Also fantastic. I think just staying grateful in general. I think we always look at what we don't have and what everybody else is posting online. And it's easy to fall into imposter syndrome or, wish I could have done that or had that. But really stopping and reflecting on what you do have is
Mm,
a good starting point and how you got there.
yeah.
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 Those are very good. Thank you so much. Where can people find you?
Well, thank you, Janet. You guys can find me on LinkedIn, Stacey Feeney, and that is Stacey with an E, the correct way to spell it. But yeah, I'll be on LinkedIn always. I love to share hopefully valuable content. We always try to give you lots of tips and tricks and actionable takeaways. And I know many of my friends in the industry have in-house teams that handle the things we do, and you may not need my help at the current moment, but if I can help in ways to give you inspiration or ways to make your jobs better, I'm happy to do so. So please find me on LinkedIn.
And I mean, you are just so much fun to follow in the first place. Like, I've just had such a good time spending all this time at conferences with you the last couple of weeks. It's been great.
Thank you.
Um, okay, well, I'm going to wrap us up and just thank everybody again for taking time to listen to this episode. Hope you found a little bit of inspiration and some good ideas to take with you. Go follow Stacey. And if you are a marketing influencer, I really encourage you to check out Cadence Marketing Solutions and our online Run Club community. You don't have to run. It's just the name of the group, but together we're better. We share a lot of ideas and thoughts and support each other from a marketing influencer capacity. We've made it our mission to support marketers, and Stacey's one of those who does that as well. So if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, comment, or share and subscribe. Also, really recognition to the Multifamily Media Network, who hosts this podcast. It is a network of a lot of really talented podcasters and bloggers and education. Please go out and check out a few other podcasters out there and thought pieces and sponsorship opportunities. Until next time, go out and optimize, find that 1%.